Good evening, everyone. We're so excited that you're here for a really great lecture as part of the Just Narratives series. I'm Karen Nelson. I'm Dean of the School of Architecture. I will take a giant step back for that microphone. And I want to welcome you to our lecture series and let you know that it's supported in part by Eastern Savings Bank. And tonight we have a very special person introducing the lecturer, and that is Vice President of Academic Affairs and Provost, Dr. Kelly Bean. Kelly, would you come forward, please?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. You're going to be so happy you came. And thank you, Yufan. Are you back there for pulling all of this together as well? So I am Kelly Bean, and I'm thrilled to introduce a dear friend of mine, Dr. Michael Spicher. I know him as a colleague. He teaches here. I also know him as a good friend, a deep and creative thinker, and a friend of my son who likes to punk me on cell phones. By trade, Michael is many things: a philosopher, a consultant, a philosopher, a consultant to the beauty, fashion, architecture, and business worlds, and a philosophical counselor. As a consultant, he enlists his expertise in aesthetics to rehumanize workspaces in ways that enhance well-being and productivity. As a philosophical counselor, he deploys the tools of philosophy to help people navigate everyday challenges. And of course, as a philosopher, he teaches students to engage fundamental questions about existence, the nature of knowledge, and the purpose of the human condition with humor, grace, and a giant dollop of aesthetics. Michael has spent 20 years exploring aesthetics, studying how beauty shapes human thinking, behavior, and ways to flourish. His work moves effortlessly from the abstract to the concrete, revealing how new spaces and experiences can be rendered through a deep engagement with aesthetics. He is co-editor of Digital Fashion, the first book ever to be published on the topic of digital fashion, kudos, and is currently writing his second book, Is Your Business Beautiful? Exploring ways of integrating aesthetics into business brands, business culture, and work environments. And I said second book, but he actually also has a third, which I just found in my notes. He's the co-author of The Aesthetic Edge, which is an ebook on how leaders orient culture through the senses. Oh, does it? Woo, all right. I guess we'll put the link up later. His writing appears in places like Architecture Boston, Beauty Matter, Madame Blue, Splice Today, and the Venetian Letter. He runs the Aesthetics Research Lab, a space for exploring the ways that aesthetics permeate everyday life and why that matters. This is an exhausting list, isn't it? How do you do it? In collaboration with the Executive Design Studio, he facilitates executive workshops where participants discover new ways to think about art, fashion, and aesthetics. And finally, together with Bella Zhang, he created Aesthetic Paths to Flourishing, a program that helps people reflect on their aesthetic values and redesign their habits with intention and beauty in mind. Michael earned his PhD in philosophy from the University of South Carolina in 2014 with a focus on aesthetics, art, and political thought. He teaches at Boston University, here at the BAC, and at Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And tonight, in his talk, he will share with us his deep insights about finding and making meaning through aesthetics and design. Michael?
Wow. Let's see. Make sure this is on so I can. I've been told that if I need to step away, though, I need to use this. This is on then. Okay, good. Okay. Well, thank you to Yufan, Kelly, Karen, and anyone else that I'm forgetting, and Jerome, wherever you are, if you're still here, and Diana for helping organize all of this. I love the theme, just narratives, first of all. So I was really excited that out of all the different lecture series I could be involved in, that it happened to fall on this one. I want to begin with a story, personal story. way back when I was a beginning graduate student teaching my very first class, I was a TA, and we would teach two sections of the same class back to back. So, as a brand new teacher, you think, okay, I prepare, I do all the things I need to do. If it goes well in the first section, it'll go well in the second section. That pretty much, that's a naive view, in case you're wondering. You never know which group of students, how it's going to play out. But there was one other thing I had not considered. The first classroom I was in was this smaller classroom, sort of like this, except the one big awful difference is there was no windows in the classroom I was teaching in. And it was, I think, it was either 7:45 in the morning or 9:45. It was one of the morning classes. Anyway, because the room was smaller, not cramped, but a tight fit, we were kind of on top of each other. We had no choice but to engage each other in good conversation, and students couldn't hide, for example. Everyone was kind of front and center, and it was a really good, lively discussion. And then for some reason, even though it was 15 minutes between classes, they moved me to a different room. And then I was in a room more like this, except again, this one's a lot nicer than the one I was in. The one I was in was a lot dark, but you can see it had similar kinds of desks, although they weren't elevated like this. They were all flat. But the basic idea is that these giant rows where they were immovable. It was completely different. It created a physical and almost like metaphorical barrier between me and the students and with each other. Conversation died in this room. So I learned quickly. I didn't necessarily have all the thinking I now have of why this might have been. I mean, there's other dynamics. Sometimes just one group of students is quieter. That happens. But I think the space ruined these two experiences, or made one good and ruined the other. The very room. So spaces matter. Hollywood gets it. Think about a movie. Could you imagine if you were going to see the latest romantic comedy, and you go in and the set, as it opens up on the very first scene, is exactly like the first scene of like a Friday the 13th? You probably, you don't expect that. So movies and TV shows, they know how to create a mood with so that the space of the movie is not just a container to put some characters to do some acting. It actually enhances the whole experience of the movie itself, and the theme and the ideas and the action and so on. There was a trend a while ago that back in the age of DVDs, there'd be these bonus materials where directors or actors would often talk about, various things. Sometimes the director would talk about cut scenes and why they cut it or whatever. But there was this trend a while ago where it seemed to be like, at least it felt like a trend to me. I don't know if it just might have been a coincidence, but every single director was like, and this house or this building was like a character in the movie, or this city was like a character in the movie. So, as annoying as that is, and as silly as that is sometimes to think about, they're onto something. I mean, imagine if the building you're working on or the park you're working on was a character. What would it say? What would it feel? What would it be like? So in a couple examples of this, Lost in Translation, 2003, the city of Tokyo became like a character in the film. Could you imagine, part of the idea was these two Americans felt lost in this city where people didn't speak their language. It was a different place for them. So this movie wouldn't have done as well if it was two people visiting San Francisco. Part of the idea was that it made sense thematically, and the kind of vibe the film conveys, the fact that it was set in Tokyo. Other example, two buildings. So not just cities, but buildings. The Shining and Downton Abbey. The Shining, I mean, could you imagine if this was a really happy, well-lit hotel. I mean, they might have changed the lighting, of course. Maybe it's a brighter space if otherwise. But anyway, yeah. So these things enhance that, but we often don't think of spaces like that, especially spaces that we go into, like our offices at work. We don't think, well, what if this office was a character? Why is it grimacing at me? Why is it smiling? Like these kinds of things we often don't think about this, but it's one way to help us think differently about space. We often think with the same metrics in mind. Depending on what industry or what context we're in, we often get trained to think a particular way, and sometimes thinking about things from a different standard or different point of view is useful. So I want to ask a question to you. In 1971, philosopher John Rawls wrote a book called A Theory of Justice. He's local. He is deceased, but he's still local in the sense that he's at Mount Auburn Cemetery, which, if you haven't been there, it's one of the most amazing cemeteries in the Boston area. In his book, A Theory of Justice, he came up with this thought experiment. I won't go into all of that detail, but it's something that made sense to me for this. What if you were designing a city, but you didn't know your place in it? So suppose you're designing a city and you know you're the leader. Well, even if we ignore overt racism and sexism for a moment and just say you have the best of intentions, but you might inadvertently make the city in a way that favors you and disadvantages other people. So you like certain things, so you put them close to you, and they're really far away from everybody else, or whatever. So what if you were designing something and you didn't know who you were going to be? So you didn't know if you were going to be the mayor, you didn't know if you were going to be a professor, an architect, a lawyer, unhoused. You didn't, or you can think about this in terms of one building too. You don't have to just think about it in terms of a city. If you don't know your role, you design in a way that benefits everyone, right? So imagine another way of putting this is: suppose I was selling you I was selling a lawnmower. Well, my goal as the seller is to try and get more money out of you, right? So I may fudge things. Oh yeah, it's in very good shape. And you're trying to pay less. So you're trying to say, oh, I can't really afford this right now. And you try to lower the price. But what if we didn't know who the buyer or seller was, but we had to collectively come up with the fairest price for what this thing is actually worth? And then all of a sudden, once we come up with that price, then we reveal who the buyer and who the seller is. I mean, obviously it doesn't work that way, but you get the idea. So that's the thought experiment here. If you don't know who you are, you don't end up with this. Obviously, I exaggerate. I found the worst possible photo of a space here. If you knew that you were going to occupy that space, then you might not even think about what's going on here. And even if we ignore evil intent, like, you just might not honestly think of it. But we should design spaces that are humane for everybody using them, not just the people paying for them, not just the elite in the building or the people that are leaders or powerful. And I know sometimes, if you just sort of move into a new building, you don't really have choices, but if you're designing something from scratch, you can make some of these decisions. One of the kind of constant things in my 20 years of studying aesthetics that I've had to come up against is just this idea, well, isn't beauty just in the eye of the beholder, and it's just skin deep, and aesthetics is, just superficial, or aesthetics just means making something pretty, but the more important thing is that it works. There's lots of studies that disprove that, which I can go into at some point, maybe especially during Q&A. But I want to make a claim that aesthetics is not just surface. It's part of the very structure of things. I don't mean like the internal structures of a building. I mean the structure of an organization. It flows through the whole thing. And ignoring it is to cause more problems than it is to solve. And the reason why I emphasize it a lot is it's never the only thing that needs to be added or enhanced, but it's often overlooked. It shapes our experience, it shapes our values, and it shapes our sense of belonging. There are some spaces that you walk into, and sometimes it's because of the people, but other times the space itself just feels off. You don't feel comfortable there. If you've been to a lot of office buildings for businesses, you may have experienced that. Or if you've ever been to an ER. Once waiting for an X-ray for waiting with someone else for an X-ray, I was in a waiting room in a local hospital that will remain nameless, and their only aesthetic feature was a TV blasting awful political stuff. Now, luckily, it was just an X-ray. Same person was going in for surgery, and they were blasting on the TV. I think the war in Ukraine. Not exactly stress relieving programming for right before you're about to go in for major surgery. So these are the kind. That's only two examples, but these are the kinds of things I'm talking about here. But I have three main things I want to discuss with you tonight. A space should encourage our capacity to flourish. That, in and of itself, doesn't seem very, tough to accept. But what we often don't talk a lot about is, what does it mean to flourish? Well, the history of philosophy is rich with ideas on this. So we will go all the way back to ancient Greece. Aristotle is actually the first person, which is kind of surprising because he's way ahead of his time here. He's actually the first person to really connect beauty with something's function. He actually talks about in his book, The Rhetoric, he talks about how beauty is different at each stage of your life, and he bases it on what a standard person in Athens at that time would be doing at that stage in their life. So he's the first person to connect it. But what does he mean by flourishing? Well, his term. Well, actually, first let me back up and say, he begins with this question: what is the meaning or purpose of life? For Aristotle, everything has a purpose. And our job is to, in terms of nature or other things, our job is to figure out what that purpose is. And I think, it's people that are going to build things. You could say the thing that you're building has some sort of functionality. You don't build buildings just because it's fun. Even if it is fun, you build it because it serves some purpose. So for Aristotle, he said it's eudaimonia is the purpose, which some translations of Aristotle translate it happiness. That's a terrible translation. It might be accurate in some sense, but it's really about a state of being, which is not happiness. You could be, yay, I'm happy, I got an A on a test. I'm not happy now because I got a C on the next thing. Happiness, in a lot of ways, is very much temporary and often dictated by circumstances. But eudaimonia is more about flourishing and well-being. And to develop this, he says, to develop virtue, which leads to this happiness, this flourishing, it's developed by, virtue is developed by habit. So for example, one of his virtues is courage. You don't get to just say you're courageous, right? I'm courageous. What if, you must have done some cool things to become courageous. Nope, I just really believe in my heart that I'm courageous, right? He says you cannot be courageous if you don't and not that he's saying you recklessly put yourself in these situations, but you have to be put in situations to exercise courage. That's how you become courageous. But for him, and the virtues are also the mean or average between an excess and deficiency. So the excess of courage would be foolhardy, where you just rush in without thinking, and the deficiency would be cowardice. So that part's less important. The point is, it's developed by habit. So if you want buildings, if you want structures that help lead to flourishing, it's on you to create those habits now. Any effort to sort of let's build this and let's just slap on some aesthetics after the fact almost never works. It feels hollow. And I just want to point out the fact that I don't know how old I was when I realized that onus and on us is just a space. The onus is on us. I mean, that is just awesome. I can't believe it took me all these decades to finally learn that that's all you have to do to say the onus. But that is it. It's on you to develop habits now. So that way you're not all of a sudden deep into your career and like, oh, yeah, I guess I'll start thinking about aesthetics now. If you don't develop habits now, you won't. It'll be every step of the way, it'll be like, oh, I'm just too busy. I know I should do that, but I'm just too busy. So that's part of why I wanted to bring this up, because it's really important to think about how your buildings, how your structures, how your designs create the things that actually matter for human beings, not just fulfill some functionality. The next aspect of flourishing I wanted to talk about comes in the tradition of Aristotle, but comes through the natural law. John Finnis's book came out in like around, I think, 1981, Natural Law and Natural Rights, in which he asserts there are 7 basic human goods. Life, which includes things like health, exercise, like anything that contributes to just the physical, biological, life. Knowledge, which anything, any kind of knowledge. So you are studying some version of architecture. I studied philosophy. Other people study history. Other people don't have formal education, but they just learn things. They just learn with their hands how to fix stuff. Play. If we are bored, we now have these devices that we can play games on, but before, it's like, well, what do we have? We have paper and a garbage can. Let's see who can get the most pieces of paper in the garbage. So play. Aesthetic experience, which I'll get to a little bit later. Friendship, which includes more formal things like marriage, as well as regular friendship. Practical reasonableness, which is your ability to develop a plan for your life and take your life where you want to go, which has very much connections with existential philosophy, which I also teach. And religion, notice it's in quotes. So Finnis is Catholic, so he means to include all of the formal religions here, but he also means to include even people that are atheist, but what is their ultimate, mission in life, or what is their ultimate meaning, what grounds their life. So that's why he puts it in quotes. So he thinks that to flourish, you need to pursue all of these, but not always equally. You just can't woefully neglect any one of them. But, as you are all, or many of you, most of you are all students, you might be pursuing knowledge more than you are pursuing some of the other ones right now, and that's okay. He just thinks that you shouldn't completely neglect. So this is, I wanted to share this with you because this is one philosopher's take on what it means to flourish. And when we think of this in terms of spaces, maybe not all the spaces you design will directly influence these 7 things, but they also shouldn't directly hinder it. I think that's the key kind of takeaway for this. So even though Aristotle connected beauty with functionality, flourishing can't be reduced to functionality. So these are the famous Maggie's, 2 of the famous Maggie's centers. I believe there's 16 of them. There might be as many as 18. They're in the UK. They're cancer centers, not hospitals, so you don't go there for treatment, but they're spaces designed to help cancer patients have a sense of community, have resources learn about their particular cancer, meet other people. So all these different reasons. It's a franchise, and one, if you want to, be sort of perfectly honest, it's kind of like a franchise in the sense. I don't know if, I mean, not legally. I just mean like, notice that they don't look alike though. They specifically have world-renowned architects and architecture firms designing these spaces to fit where the space is going to be located. So that's why that one is green, because it's surrounded by trees. This one's, you can't really tell from this photo, but it's in a little bit more of an urban environment, but they obviously incorporate a lot of elements of biophilic design in here. So they value the fact that they want these to be sanctuaries. Like when you walk into a cathedral and have this sense of awe, even if you're not religious at all, you might have a sense of awe as a cathedral draws your eyes up and the light. I was at this cathedral in outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and the way that they had the stained glass was just gorgeous. All of the stained glass on the side where people would sit was like blues and purples and such. And then up at the front, at the altar, stained glass was red and orange. And so it looked this fire almost, because we were there at noon. It was perfect. It was like the perfect lighting to see this. So that kind of idea, they want that. And part of the reason why they want that is we know that people that have access to nature and other kinds of positive aesthetics heal better. So it has practical value too. In regular hospitals, these are not hospitals, but in regular hospitals, one of the things that you want is people to vacate their hospital bed quicker so that other people can have them. So they take that very seriously at these. Another one, my good friend Suchi. If you know Suchi Reddy, she is, as far as I can tell, like a world-renowned architect that somehow crossed my path. Anyway, and you can read her book, Form Follows Feeling, upstairs in the library. There's a copy. And full disclosure, I do have an article in it as well. But I remember something that stayed with me. I think it must have been around 2021. As you know, when you have clients that want you to design something, they have probably strong opinions, and their opinions might be not very good. So you might know this is not going to work. This is not going to, not just functionally, this is just not a good idea. It's not going to bring in the kind of natural light, or it's not, whatever the issue is, right? Well, Suchi was telling us in 2021 that some of the design choices that she nudged some of her clients in. Remember 2020 when we were all trapped inside? Some of the design choices she nudged her clients to make, they were calling her in 2021 and be like, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much for pushing us in that direction. Now that I'm trapped indoors, I can see why that was so important. I have a better sense of well-being, and everything is better." So she kind of takes Louis Sullivan's famous form follows function, and she calls it form follows feeling, and she definitely brings in a lot of ideas from neuroaesthetics and other psychology of aesthetics into her work to much success. So I want you to take a moment and think about a space where you have felt yourself flourish. What about that space made it possible? And just maybe I'll give about 60 seconds, just share that space with whoever's sitting next to you. All right. I know that was quick. But as I'm sure you could tell from your discussions and everything, that there's a plethora of spaces that can do this. We could do the opposite and say, what are spaces that made you feel awful and uncomfortable? There's a lot of those too. Sometimes it's for different reasons. Sometimes it's because of the people maybe weren't welcoming. But a lot of times it's because of the space itself. And as I said, especially if you've ever worked at certain offices, you've experienced this. So the second thing I want to say is a space creates meaning. When I originally did this title slide, I kind of followed the first one that said a space should do this with the capacity to flourish. But then as I was thinking about it, I was like, a space shouldn't create meaning. It just does create meaning, whether it's positive or negative, which we'll get to in a second. So it's very intentional. Hans-Georg Gadamer, a student of the even more famous philosopher Martin Heidegger, Gadamer wrote a book called Truth and Method, and he describes our experience of meaning as a horizon. And we all have one. This is just his particular metaphor. You could appeal to Plato's cave, or you could use the metaphor of a perimeter. There's all different metaphors. He chooses to use a horizon. So out there, somewhere in the horizon, all of our ideas somehow connect. We don't always see it. When we're down at this level, this is really pixely. Huh. Sorry about that. But you can see down here, though, you can still tell what it is at least. Right here, it doesn't connect necessarily, but as it gets closer, it does. So he calls it a fusion of horizons. And what he means by that is meaning is co-created. You may have a design, and people that come and use your space now bring some other meaning to it. This is very common in the world of art. An artist makes a work of art, has a particular idea in mind, and audience members come and completely misinterpret it. I'm kidding. Although that may happen sometimes, but audience members bring their own idea. So just think of something fairly neutral, a painting of a cabin in the woods. One person sees it, has these feelings of joy because they remember going camping with their family and skiing and all this fun. Another person gets depressed and sad seeing it because they bring a tragedy that happened in wintertime to this painting. They're both legitimate. This is what Gadamer is talking about, is meaning is co-created. So organizations, it's not just top down. It's not just in some ways, like a business that starts, there is a founder usually. Usually businesses don't found themselves. So usually the founder has a story, and often that becomes the story. And there's some value in that. That makes sense. There's nothing wrong with that. But each person that then works there brings a new story, a new set of, and this is what Gadamer is talking about, how we need to allow spaces to give people the opportunity to create that meaning and bring their own meaning to them, not impose it onto them. I know there's one other thing I wanted to say. There it is. Yes, with the art example, so in other words, just to be clear, art is not tied to its original intent. That doesn't mean that might not be interesting if an artist explicitly says, I painted this to do X. It's not that that's irrelevant. It's that it doesn't have to be tied to that. You can bring your own meaning to it. So as I said before, spaces will have meaning. Think about this. Imagine you need to go into a hospital for some procedure, and maybe it's a hospital that you're not, it's a specialist hospital or something, so it's not one that you're used to. So you're going there for the first time. And as you walk in and see the waiting room, it looks like it came out of a 70s magazine. Does that instill confidence in you that this hospital has the latest techniques and equipment and so on? They might very well have the latest techniques and so on, but the design sends a very different message. So that's a case where it's a very negative message. I mean, and when I talked about before with imagining your space as a character, think about what message does your space send? Is it positive? Is it negative? Spaces are places where you know, people develop rituals, foster memory. They become symbols. So what is your space saying? What meaning is it conveying? And then does it allow people who participate to bring their own? So I just want to give a couple examples. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial, it's a meaning that goes across generations. People now that are younger, that didn't live through it, have a very different kind of reaction to it than people that maybe were still alive or maybe are still alive that lived through it. I also want to bring up, I had to bring up at least something to do with digital fashion. This dress, Iridescence, exists only digitally. It does not have any physical counterpart. In 2019, a two-dimensional version, so not even a three-dimensional version, a two-dimensional version sold for a measly $9,500. The person that bought it uploaded this is not the person that bought it. This is part of the thing, part of like the company's promotional. The person that bought it uploaded a photo, and they fit the dress onto her two-dimensional digital photo. The point of this, besides just to, this is sort of the one that got it going in some ways, the whole digital fashion, which elevated because of the pandemic in some ways, because everyone was inside on their computers. But the point here is that meaning does not require material, which I'm sure that's not a big, profound statement. But I think this has some interesting implications for you. Spaces, it's our phenomenal experience of spaces that the intentions, it doesn't require materiality to have that. I mean, this would go to, like Edmund Husserl, who is the founder of phenomenology, if you're familiar with that philosophy. He talks about who cares, like philosophers often explore, like, what's the nature of reality? What is the nature of a chair? And these kinds of things. And he's like, who cares? How does it affect you? That's what we care about. And so I think that's an important point to bring up, that it can be digital. It doesn't have to be physical. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You don't have to turn to your neighbor. I just wanted a question for you to think about. If your building were gone tomorrow, what part of its meaning would remain in the lives of the people who used it? There's an ephemeral artist named Herb Parker who makes these interesting structures out of rebar and sod. And because the sod is living, it eventually dies because it's uprooted, literally. And he says in a talk that I saw where he was like introducing this new work that he had made, he said, "I love the fact that my pieces never become eyesores." But the thing that he said that was interesting is when they're gone, or ignored. So I don't know if you've ever been like past the same sculpture every day or whatever, and eventually, maybe the first time you're like, "Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool," and then eventually you're like, you don't even see it. So his sculptures are never ignored because they don't live long enough to be ignored. And he says, but because the people that did experience them, they have an imprint in their mind about his sculptures in a way that wouldn't be the case if it was still standing. That's a different example, obviously, but it does relate to this question. So the last one I want to talk about is a space embodies aesthetics. Aesthetics as a moral and social act. So beauty shapes our perception. Famous person studying empirical aesthetics right now is named Anjan Chatterjee. He wrote a book called The Aesthetic Brain. And Anjan, in various conversations, has said that one of the big things he studied is the human face. So if you think beauty is in the eye of the beholder, you should read this literature because it kind of suggests otherwise. Not that it's completely objective either, but he said one of the things that he studied is facial scars. And it's a very awful, unfortunate thing about us that we negatively judge people with facial scars. But part of his research, and other people like Nancy Etkoff, who's down the road at Harvard in her famous book, Survival of the Prettiest, the thing that they point out is we often do these things subconsciously. So the fact that we do them, we don't even recognize that we're, making these mistakes and judging people in certain ways. So we need to learn that we do this in order to overcome doing this. So I bring up, so I say that to say that a lot of times we judge people with facial scars as being less moral. So it's something worth being aware of to help us overcome it. So I bring up, you might think this is a weird spot to bring up Airbnb. Well, I want to tell you a quick story about them. In 2009, they almost went bankrupt before they even got started. They had the website, they were launching in New York. The three guys that founded it were in San Francisco, trying to live on $200 a week among the three of them. Which you can imagine is not very possible, even in 2009. Well, 2009, for those that remember it, camera phones were terrible. So what would you do if you were taking a picture of your room that you have for rent on Airbnb? Take it with your camera phone. It was a dark, grainy horror movie set. So what they realized, that's the only thing that was a problem. They were getting people to go to the website, people looking around, nobody was buying. So all they did was they flew to New York and professionally reshot all of the photos, and they doubled their income to only $400, which is still not a lot, but they kept doubling and doubling and doubling. The rest is history. So whatever other issues we may have with them raising rents and such, but it's an interesting thing that literally the only thing they changed was the aesthetics of the photos, and that was all that needed to happen. Sensory experiences reinforce flourishing and meaning. In Brazil, the poorest areas are known as favelas. There were two artists named Haas and Han who started doing murals, and then they started doing them in these kind of unlikely places after a while. And so they found this one favela that I don't know how they made their choice, but they considered it one of the worst ones. And favelas often take place up a mountain or a hill, not necessarily a mountain, but up a hill. And so they got the community involved to help paint a giant mural. And so it was like dark, dismal place that they added this amazing mural that kind of just climbs up the hill. It transformed the entire community. So it's one thing that, it's better to have some space to protect you from the cold and rain and so on than no space, but the wrong kind of space doesn't inspire you to actually overcome your circumstance. It doesn't actually enforce or reinforce flourishing. It hinders it. It gives you some sort of bare necessity for survival, and it stops there. Elaine Scarry, in her book on beauty and being just, says, beauty brings copies of itself into being. It's not just decoration, it's part of justice because it affirms human dignity. And a colleague of mine works with refugees and points out how even in refugee camps where they're supposed to be temporary, right? So in some ways you're like, well, I get it. If you're making a permanent structure, why do you need to care about aesthetics? But why do you need to care about it in a temporary housing for refugees? Because it affirms human dignity. So the people that she has interviewed for this project, they often say, they often talk about, they often use that exact phrase. It affirms our dignity. It gives us a reason to hope that this isn't the end of the story. And we hear stories of Viktor Frankl in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, and Primo Levi in his book, If This Is a Man, talk about their experiences of appealing to very, very little bits of art from memory or little bits of nature that they experience to help them overcome the Holocaust, to help them survive throughout the concentration camps. And that seems like it takes a lot to survive the most terrible situations like that. I won't say too much here for the sake of time, but I will say, if you know this scene from Good Will Hunting, since we're in Boston, it makes sense to bring this up, where Robin Williams says, you could probably tell me all about the Sistine Chapel, but you can't tell me what it smells like. His point is that the whole experience of our senses is necessary to say that you've experienced something. It all works together. It's not just, the Sistine Chapel is not merely visual. That may be the part we think of the most, especially if you've never been there, like I haven't. So, especially if you haven't been there and then you see photos of it. But the whole experience, what does the floor feel like? What does it feel like not to look at it on a screen this way, but actually to stand and look up at it? There's a different perspective there. So it's the overall experience. I'll kind of skip through this one. I'll just read it for you, though, for the sake of time. How do light, color, material, and form communicate care and welcome in your design? So that's something for you to ponder later. So I want to end with, where do we go from here? So, okay, so we've said these things, we have flourishing, meaning, aesthetics. Okay, great. What do we do now? Talked about marketplaces, libraries, offices, digital environments, public squares. One of the things I would challenge you, especially, I had a colleague of mine in, I think he's in London or somewhere in England, wrote a book on utopia, and he's a landscape architect. And he basically says, a lot of times developers want things like squares to look a certain way because they're photographable, but no one uses them because they're not habitable. So thinking about how can, we get it. You need to put this on Instagram or wherever you put photos. But it should also, why can't you do both? So I think that's the message is doing both. But I wanted to, ask you to think, this is for your own reflection. What are your blind spots? So we turn to Rawls and, design as if you don't know who you are in the space that you're designing. Then, knowing your place, how do you design? How do you check your blind spots? Part of it is doing exercises like this and developing habits of thinking about these things. I was at a really fancy building, part of a big university, and they just opened this building. It was like millions of dollars. I mean, everything was really, it was actually, it was an amazing building. They had this nice area where it ascends, where students can hang out, unless you're in a wheelchair. So now it's a modern building, so it has elevators for all the floors, but you can't. Hey guys, how's the group meeting? Just text me when you come up with an idea. So these are the kinds of things like knowing your blind spots, knowing where to check so that everybody can be part of it. Then I can imagine like an objection. Well, what about, you don't, it's easy for you to say that you're a philosopher. You don't design stuff. You don't know about all the rules we have to follow and everything. Yeah, yes, that's true. You know more about that than I do. But what I do know is developing habits is absolutely crucial. How do you incorporate, morality and social justice into your designs? By thinking about it, by making it front and center. We just learned the sad news today that Jerry quit Ben and Jerry's. if you saw that going around, because he stands for something, not just money. I mean, he's old and he could retire, so he's definitely in a position to do that in some ways where when you're just starting out, you might have to be a little bit careful about what the battles you want to fight. But that's why, and this is me speaking definitely as a philosopher, that's why it's important to revisit your assumptions and ideas and question things regularly. Where are your blind spots? Where are the things you're missing? So this is architect Michael Ford. You may know him by his code name, the hip hop architect. He was living the dream. I don't know what your dream is, but I can imagine it's one of the dreams architect students have. He was in a big firm in Chicago, and he quit suddenly because that firm makes prisons, and he couldn't justify that, especially as an African American. And he also thought that working at one firm limits him, whereas being a consultant that can go across many firms gives him actually more opportunities to enact justice. But that was his way around this. So to kind of summarize, encourage flourishing, create meaning, embody aesthetics. The spaces we design are more than buildings. They are narratives of justice, care, and belonging. Thank you. I guess we're doing questions now. Just use this one. This one's still on. Okay.
Pause on mine, but I don't yet have a question.
There's a hand.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Always, you're always waiting for the
Hello?
first.
I'm Michael. Nice to
Me
meet
too.
you. Nice. When did you learn into architecture when you graduated from philosophy?
Oh, honestly, it was interesting because when I moved to Boston in 2015, I didn't know anybody. So my goal was to try and network as much as possible. And just from various things, I met a professor at BU, and I actually had to sit down with the chief of arts and culture in the mayor's office, who like 2 chiefs ago, her name was Julie. And because I have an art background, I always thought that like I should work with an art organization or something. And they were like, maybe you should work with architects and designers. And then from there, I kind of just maybe I need to go like basically I've sort of founded the aesthetics research lab in 2016 to basically find aesthetics wherever they may be found. And what I found is a lot of people in different fields, even fields that you think would care about it, like product design. I would have thought that's a field riddled with aesthetics. Someone I know said that no one cares about aesthetics and product design. They look at it as making pretty after the design part. So that's kind of how I initially. It was a more conscious choice to seek out architecture.
Great. Thank you.
I have 2 questions now from the online community. Davis Hart asks, do you have a favorite building in Back Bay, Boston? And if so, why?
Man, I actually can't remember the name of it, but it's the church with the Tiffany glass. Probably is my favorite. If you haven't seen the Tiffany glass, like stained glass window is great.
Arlington Street Church.
Is it which one?
It's Arlington Street.
Okay,
I think
yeah.
it's maybe the Unitarian.
And you can tell the Tiffany glass because most of it still is intact, but there's one, it's like giant, one area that had gotten damaged at some point in history, and they redid it with regular stained glass. And in another context, it might look cool, but next to the Tiffany glass, it's like this is terrible. But yeah, I think that one probably is one of my favorites. Hi, Davis.
I have more questions. Samantha Veldhuis would like to know, could you respond to your sense of existing architecture within a community? Would you support or defend the case for its belonging compared to demolishing for new construction?
Oh, I mean, when we're in Boston, I think one of the big things is the history. I mean, this is definitely a answer for Boston, and having having a good connection with the Boston Preservation Alliance. Yeah, I think all buildings should be saved unless they can't. I tend to agree with, I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but someone here probably knows the guy that said the most sustainable building is the one that's already built. So I think it at all, I wouldn't say at all costs, but if possible, I would say save most buildings unless you just can't. And definitely don't put too much glass on all of them.
Hi, my name is Xander. I had a question. As a philosopher, not as an architect, how would you go about creating spaces that are conducive to human flourishing at different scales?
Ooh. I can give you an example of students that I've talked to, not BAC students, just for the record. They had a dorm designed for them in Boston, and we were talking about aesthetics, and they said that the defense of this new dorm, there's a communal area, and the architects and whatever, I think maybe on the website, or maybe there's panels on the wall or something. They have all sorts of reasons we chose this color because it's calming. We do this because it's this, and no one bothered to ask students what they want. And so students they tell me they never use this area at all. It's part of their dorm. It's the public communal area. So I think it's really important to create dialogue. And this is, I mean, I think that's what it means to be a philosopher, is to dialogue. But so I think that's what, another example of this is, someone I know told me recently, I think it was actually an architecture firm, small one, but I don't know the name, so I can't even accidentally slip and tell you. Their waiting area was out of date, and it used to be that the chairs that people would sit, it's kind of in like this area, this open area, and the chairs used to have like high backs. And they got rid of that, and now they have chairs that are like have low backs. No one sits in them because I forget the term that some of you may know this for sure. The term where we like stay on the perimeter. We don't like our backs open. It makes us feel unsafe. So the fact they put these chairs that are sticking out in the waiting room, and they might be nice, they might look well. So again, no one bothered to have conversations with actual users of the space. And in fact, this is deviating from the philosophy part, but I was at the inaugural Intentional Spaces Summit at Johns Hopkins, put on by the Arts and Mind Lab there. And on the stage, different architects and psychologists and stuff were talking, and one of the things they said was, we do a good job of studying, and like we kind of know like what's supposed to, how to design in a way that's supposed to help people and be conducive, but then we just stop. So once the space hands over to the users, we don't bother to see if, well, did it work? So it's actually a huge gap in the research right now. I mean, at least it was a few years ago, and I imagine they haven't caught up that quickly, but they were all acknowledging that this is a huge gap, that nobody studies what happens when, so like we might learn more instead of just studying, like testing in a lab or under, ideal circumstances. Now go back and see what, so I think to me, the dialogue is really the crucial part.
Thank you.
So my name is Corey. To help kind of set up my question, I'm going to create a scenario for you. So let's say I've got a client, we're just beginning design phase, and he's very utilitarian, just bare minimalist, no decoration, kind of wants minimal money sort of thing. You got an elevator ride to convince him to start thinking about aesthetics and including that in the beginning of the designs. What's your pitch?
The elevator is a tough sell because that's not a lot of time. But I guess I would say there's so many practical. I mean, if you're trying to use that to get the follow-up conversation, I think you could say there's practical benefits that actually help productivity. And I can tell you an anecdote. A lawyer I know here in town, after an event, we had this conversation about everyday aesthetics, and a few months later, he emailed me and said, I really enjoyed our conversation, but I actually have a story now that kind of is a real example of what we were talking about. He switched offices in his firm. His original office, it's a really nice firm, really fancy firm. Like they rented out Fenway once. So he switched from an office where the window looked at an ugly side of a building to now overlooking the Rose Kennedy Greenway, the Boston Harbor, and a huge view of the sky. And he said, I feel happier and more productive. So we know that better aesthetics leads to productivity, better productivity, and it lowers stress, which stress leads to worse decisions. And we know that like certain kinds of features, like Harvard Business Review in an article recently said 47% of people feel depressed and tired. So not just depressed, which you could say, well, maybe you could conjure up the strength to overcome that, but depressed and tired when they don't have access to natural light. So like we know that aesthetics makes things better. In the US, we don't like to listen to research, though. I guess that's part of American exceptionalism. That's a whole other story, though, that we don't have to get into now.
Thank you.
Hi, my
Hello.
question is a little bit nerdy. You mentioned that aesthetics as a moral and social act. And I get the social act, but I wonder what is your take on the moral?
Interesting question. So I teach history of aesthetics, and we get to a time period in the 1700s where the British empiricists and moralists and Neoplatonists connect beauty with morality. Whether or not there is a connection, they also used it for discriminatory purposes of we are the civilized, they, whoever they are the barbarians. But here's where I would ask, we still hold some connection. Just think about the way we use language. If I say, who do you think is a beautiful person? In English, we usually don't refer to people's physical beauty with that question. And someone that you think is a beautiful person, there might be room for us to disagree about this, but if you're making the claim so-and-so is a beautiful person, you don't think that person is evil. Other people might, but you don't. So we have some sort of a connection there, and I think the idea is that aesthetics helps us see that there's care, and care is definitely a part of morality. Caring for a space, it communicates a message, and so I think there's a moral act in that.
Thank you. We're going to end on that beautiful response. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Michael.